Dear friends, welcome to this week's virtual Drasha. This week you have the incredible privilege of Parshas Vayishlach, and the Parsha begins with the dramatic encounter between Yaakov and Esav. It's been over 20 years, over 2 decades since the brothers have last seen each other, and they didn't exactly part on the best of terms. Esav ready to kill Yaakov because he feels that Yaakov stole the birthright, and Yaakov has to literally run for his life, seeks refuge in the house of Lavan, gets married, establishes a family, and 22 years later the brothers reunite. And you feel the uncertainty. You feel the anxiety in the psukim themselves. Yaakov Avinu, unsure of what he's going to face. Has Esav forgiven him after all of these years? Is Esav going to exhibit brotherly love and connection? Or is this going to be a war? Is it going to be a battle? And if it is a battle, is Yaakov really equipped to go ahead and meet that military challenge with Esav? So the pasuk says as follows. The pasuk says in Parak Lamed Beis, pasuk Ches, chapter 32, verse 8. Vayira Yaakov ma'od. And here the pasuk actually says that Yaakov Avinu was incredibly afraid. Vayitzer lo. He was concerned, it was bothersome to him. Vayachatz esa ama sharito. He splits up the camp. V'esatzon v'esabokar v'hagamal u'mshei machanos. And he splits up the people and the livestock into 2 camps. And then the pasuk goes on and says, the next pasuk goes on and says, Yaakov Avinu has a strategy. He feels that militarily he will not be able to take on Esav. So the best he could do is, whoever Esav attacks will give the other camp the opportunity to flee. Now, interestingly enough, at the end of the day, he doesn't actually end up splitting the camps. A fascinating discussion of itself. But this was Yaakov's strategy. And Rashi HaKadosh comments on this pasuk something amazing. Rashi says, Hiskin atzmo l'shlosha dvarim. Yaakov Avinu prepared himself in 3 ways for this encounter with Esav. Number 1, l'daran. He sent a gift, right? He sent a lot of livestock, a big gift. L'tfilah, he prays to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the next one. Vayomer Yaakov, Elokei Avi Avram, Elokei Avi Yitzchak. Hashem, he davens to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And lastly, l'milchama. Ultimately, again, he prepares for war. 3 things: gift, prayer, and war. Now, interestingly enough, Rav Sorotzkin, in his Perish Aznaim L'Torah, says something incredibly beautiful. Rav Sorotzkin writes as follows. He says, if you notice, by the way, first of all, he points out Rashi's order is not really reflected in the Pesukim. In reality, the order was like this. Yaakov Avinu first prepared himself for battle, right? Vayachas l'shnei machanos. Then ultimately, again, l'tfilah. Then he davened. And then l'daran vayikach mincha le'esav. He sends a gift. And incredibly enough, Rav Sorotzkin asks a fascinating question. He says, Yaakov, doesn't it make sense to daven first? Right? If you think about this, Yaakov Avinu first prepares for war, then he goes ahead and davens, and then he gives a gift. Why not go ahead and daven first, right? Isn't davening the most instinctive thing that we do as Jews in times of distress? And Rav Sorotzkin says something incredible. He says as follows. He says, Madua lo hisra b'tfilah. Why didn't Yaakov begin by davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? First daven, then you worry about war, then you worry about gifts. So says Rav Sorotzkin, Madua lo hisra b'tfilah. Why didn't Yaakov Avinu begin first with prayer? Mipnei shenivhal mitshuvas hamalochim. Yaakov Avinu was overwhelmed by the report of his scouts. Remember again, Yaakov Avinu sent malachim. He sent whether they were messengers or angels to see what's happening with Esav. And they come back. And remember again, they tell him that Esav is coming with 400 men. And the pasuk says, Vayira Yaakov ma'od. Yaakov was very afraid. V'lo haisa daito miyusheves alav lehispalo bekavana. And Yaakov Avinu was unable to daven with kavana because he was so overwhelmed, because he was just so almost like tzeflagen, like he was scared, he was anxious, he was nervous, he was just downright frightened. He didn't have the yishuv adas, he didn't have the inner quietude, the inner tranquility. He wasn't able to still his heart and still his neshama and still his mind enough to go ahead and daven. And therefore, again, because he doesn't have the ability to daven, davening requires kavanah, requires some inner quietude. Therefore, again, he begins with preparing for the war. Vayachatz obesoch kach nisyashva daito v'amad b'tfilah. So he begins to prepare for war, and only after he's involved in the preparations is he able to settle his mind, and only then afterwards is he able to daven. So, an incredible idea that first Yaakov Avinu, so again, even though we would have thought Yaakov would have started with tefillah, started with prayer, he didn't, because prayer requires a certain level of inner quietude, a certain level of mental or spiritual tranquility. Not that tefillah requires everything to be okay, but a person has to be in a headspace where he's able to go ahead and enter into this dialogue with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yaakov Avinu was so overwhelmed by everything that was occurring around him. He first prepares for war, settles himself, and then davens. But perhaps, there's another insight that could be gleaned from these psukim as well. That perhaps Yaakov Avinu is teaching us a profound life lesson. We often assume that in times of crisis, in times of difficulty, the first step, the first thing to do is to daven. Now, dear friends, of course, davening, tefillah, is the most reflexive thing that a Jew does in times of good and in times of trouble and distress. But perhaps what Yaakov Avinu is modeling for us is that when we find ourselves in distress, perhaps the first place we have to look to is not upward, but rather inward. What can I do about these circumstances? What can I do to alleviate the pain and the suffering? What can I do to address the distress? So often, it's almost as if the first place we look is to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when in fact, perhaps what Yaakov Avinu was teaching us is the first place we have to look is to ourselves. What can I do to improve my circumstances? When I find myself in a difficult spot in life, maybe, the first place to look to is not to the Ribono Shel Olam, but the first place to look to is, what do I need to do? HaKadosh Baruch Hu places us in circumstances in life. The Ribono Shel Olam creates realities for us in life, and we believe with all of our heart that every single one of my life circumstances has been created, orchestrated, and choreographed to make me better, to allow me to self-actualize, to allow me to transcend. And as such, the avoda, when you encounter difficult circumstances in life, is don't first look upward, but instead look inward. What do I need to do to address this situation? Perhaps, again, Rav Suraskin's insight is beautiful, but maybe it's not that Yaakov lacked Yishuv Hadas. It's not that he lacked, inner quietude or just presence of mind to daven. Maybe it's just the opposite. Maybe he had such presence of mind and he had such clarity that he realized HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to act. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to do. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to problem solve. And then, of course, recognizing I can't do anything without the Ribono Shel Olam's partnership. Nothing happens unless the Ribono Shel Olam is holding my hand throughout it all. I can't accomplish anything. I can't actualize any goal. I can't cross any finish line. There is no objective that can materialize without the Ribono Shel Olam's partnership. But first, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that perhaps before you ask me to be your partner, what are you doing? What are you doing about your circumstances in life? What are you doing about the difficulties? What are you doing about the challenges? So Yaakov Avinu first prepares for war, and then only afterwards does he daven. But you'll ask, but if that's really correct, if this idea is really correct, so wouldn't it make more sense to say that Yaakov Avinu went ahead, planned for war, sent the gift, and then daven at the end? But that's not the structure. He prepares for war, davens, and then gift. Elamai, perhaps what the idea is like this. When we begin to take decisive action in life, and begin to really take the reins of existence and try to figure out what each of us can do to improve our lot and to improve our circumstances. First, take decisive action. And then when you daven, that dialogical connection, that partnership with HaKadosh Baruch Hu opens my eyes to the fact that there's even more I can do. If you begin with hishtadlus, if you begin with your human effort, then bring in HaKadosh Baruch Hu as your partner. That partnership opens my eyes with even greater clarity regarding things I can do to improve my lot, to improve my circumstances. So Yaakov Avinu first takes decisive action. He gets ready for war because you have to take the reins of your life first. And then HaKadosh brings in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he davens, and then as a result of that dialogical connection and that divine partnership, Yaakov says, there's more I can do. There's more I can do. And that's when ultimately, again, he goes and he sends the gift to Esav. And dear friends, what a profound and important life lesson for us. We all have our challenges. We all have our Esav, right? We all have those moments in life where I see what's coming down the pike. And sometimes it's right in front of me. And I see the challenges and I see the difficulties and whether they've materialized or I see the storm brewing in the distance. And although it sounds so beautiful to always directly turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have to be honest. And sometimes when we turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, sometimes really what we're doing is we're giving ourselves an excuse not to act. We're giving ourselves an excuse not to take the reins. That's Chash Baruch Hu. Of course, Chash Baruch Hu. Everything is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But at the end of the day, what life demands of us is a Yaakov Avinu-like approach. When I find myself in the midst of difficult circumstances, step one, don't look upward, but look inward. And then after I know that I've put in my hishtadlus, I've done my part, I have rolled up my sleeves and tried to address this life issue, then of course, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu partner with me. HaKadosh Baruch Hu help me. Or in circumstances where again, there is no hishtadlus, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, okay, I tried, I thought, I need you. And then when we create that synergistic relationship with the divine to problem solve and to address issues, suddenly my eyes are opened and I realize there are so many more possible avenues of resolution that are open in front of me. Sometimes it sounds strange, but you have to resist the temptation just to look upward and find the koach to look inward. We are so powerful. We are so able. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us the tools to meet so many of our challenges. If we take that first step, then bring in His partnership. And then with that partnership, open our eyes to even more tools, more possible avenues of resolution. There is no telling what we could accomplish. Wishing everyone a good Erev Shabbos and a beautiful Shabbos Kodesh.